3 months after a billionaire publicly threw his pregnant wife into the streets, he sat alone in federal custody asking for one last meeting. The mistress who once laughed on the balcony was now crying outside a courthouse.
The data is
So
on the
what
flash
happened?
drive.
Good, everything
How
is in
did a
place.
woman with
Just
no money,
promise me
no
our family
home,
is
and no
safe.
protection bring down a man who controlled an empire? This wasn't just a divorce. It was a miscalculation. And Victor Langston didn't realize it until it was too late. The storm arrived just after 10, rolling across the manicured hills of the Langston estate like a warning no one inside intended to hear. Lightning cut across the glass walls of the mansion, illuminating marble floors and curated art that had been chosen not for beauty but for status. Charlotte Hayes stood in the center of the foyer, one hand resting instinctively on her 7-month pregnant stomach, trying to understand why her husband's voice sounded like a boardroom verdict instead of a conversation. Victor Langston did not shout. He did not pace. He stood still, controlled, hands clasped behind his back as if presenting quarterly results. "This arrangement is no longer sustainable," he said evenly. "Arrangement?" Charlotte repeated, disbelief rising in her throat. "I'm your wife." "You were," he corrected, sliding a folder across the console table. "The separation has already been filed. Legal has activated the prenup." The words did not feel real until the front doors opened and 2 security guards stepped inside. Rain swept in with them, sharp and cold. One of the guards avoided eye contact as he carried a suitcase Charlotte had not packed. "You planned this," she whispered. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. "I prepared for it." Upstairs, slow applause echoed from the balcony. Serena Caldwell stepped forward, draped in Charlotte's silk robe, champagne glass balanced in her hand. She looked down at Charlotte with a smile too calm to be accidental. "You really thought he'd risk everything for sentiment?" Serena asked lightly. "This is business." Charlotte felt something fracture inside her, not loudly but permanently. "You're wearing my robe," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. Serena shrugged. "It fits better." The humiliation sharpened when camera flashes burst beyond the gates. Paparazzi clustered at the entrance, lenses angled toward the open doors. Victor had tipped them off. He wanted documentation. He wanted narrative control. "You called the press?" Charlotte asked, incredulous. Victor did not deny it. The story needed framing. Instability during a major acquisition would damage shareholder confidence. Understanding dawned slowly, painfully. Victor's company was days away from finalizing a multi-billion-dollar property acquisition that would secure his dominance in the market. A stable, silent wife fit the image. A pregnant woman asking questions about internal finances did not. "I questioned your offshore transfers," Charlotte said quietly. "That's what this is." "You overstepped," Victor replied. "And your recent emotional volatility made it easy." Her phone vibrated. A banking alert flashed across the screen. "Account access restricted." Another alert followed. "Credit services suspended." Within seconds, her financial identity had been stripped away. "You froze everything," she said. "It's temporary," Victor replied. "Until matters settle." Lightning cracked overhead as one of the guards lifted the suitcase and set it just outside the threshold. Rain soaked the driveway, pooling along the stone steps that Charlotte had once decorated with lanterns for charity galas. "Victor, I'm 7 months pregnant," she said, voice breaking despite her effort to contain it. "You can't do this tonight." He looked at her stomach briefly, then away. "I can't afford hesitation." Serena descended halfway down the staircase, heels clicking deliberately. "You should leave before this gets uglier," she said softly. "You're embarrassing yourself." A sharp pain tightened across Charlotte's abdomen, forcing her to inhale sharply. The baby shifted, reacting to her stress. She steadied herself against the doorframe as cameras outside continued flashing. "You're staging my humiliation," she said, meeting Victor's eyes fully now. I'm protecting my company, he replied. And destroying your family. He did not answer. The guard stepped aside, making it clear the threshold no longer belonged to her. Charlotte walked forward slowly, rain soaking through her dress within seconds. Each flash from the cameras felt invasive, documenting her lowest moment for public consumption. Halfway down the steps, she removed her wedding ring. For a split second, she considered throwing it into the darkness beyond the gates. Instead, she slipped it into her coat pocket. Not discarded. Not surrendered. Behind her, Serena raised her glass in silent triumph. At the edge of the driveway, Charlotte turned once more. One day, she said calmly, her voice almost lost in the storm, you'll regret this. Victor's expression did not change. Regret is for people who lose. Thunder rolled again as the gates began closing. Charlotte reached the curb, breath unsteady, body trembling from cold and contraction pain. The mansion lights glowed behind her like a fortress she had once believed was home. Her phone vibrated in her hand. Unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. A single message appeared on the screen. You were removed because you know too much. The message stayed on Charlotte's screen long after the rain stopped feeling cold. You were removed because you know too much. For nearly 10 minutes she stood under a streetlight at the edge of the estate, staring at those words while the gates behind her sealed shut. It could have been a cruel prank. It could have been Victor tightening psychological pressure. But deep down, Charlotte knew something else. 2 weeks ago, she had asked Victor about a series of property transfers routed through unfamiliar subsidiaries. He had dismissed her questions with a smile too quick to be natural. Now she understood the timing. Another message arrived. If you want answers, come alone. Midtown. 11:30 p.m. Every instinct warned her against it. She was 7 months pregnant, financially cut off, publicly humiliated, and likely being watched. But if Victor had orchestrated her removal to silence her, walking away blindly would only confirm his strategy. She ordered a rideshare under her maiden name. The meeting location was a dimly lit cafe near Bryant Park, nearly empty at that hour. A man in his late 40s sat in the back corner, posture tense but composed. He stood when she approached. Charlotte Hayes, he asked quietly. Yes. My name is Daniel Mercer. I used to be Chief Financial Officer at Langston Holdings. Used to. Charlotte slid into the booth slowly, keeping her coat wrapped tightly around her. You sent the message. Daniel nodded. I'm sorry about tonight. Save your sympathy, she replied calmly. Tell me why my husband just destroyed my life. Daniel studied her for a moment, as if recalibrating his expectations. Victor didn't destroy your life because of Serena. Or because of image management. He removed you because you're legally exposed. The words landed harder than the rain had. Explain. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. The acquisition next week isn't just expansion. It's consolidation. Once it closes, several asset valuations become locked under merged reporting. Audits become exponentially more difficult. Charlotte frowned. That's standard corporate structuring. Yes, Daniel said evenly. Unless the valuations were inflated beforehand. Silence stretched between them. Victor artificially boosted property values across 3 development zones, Daniel continued. He leveraged inside zoning approvals, rerouted through shell corporations registered in Nevada and the Caymans. The numbers looked organic on paper, but they were engineered. Charlotte felt the room narrow. You're saying it's fraud. I'm saying it's sophisticated enough to pass surface scrutiny. And where do I fit into this? She asked. Daniel pulled a tablet from his briefcase and turned it toward her. Digital authorization logs filled the screen. That's your electronic signature, he said. Charlotte's stomach dropped. I never approved those transfers. Your spousal authorization credentials were embedded into the approval matrix, Daniel explained. Victor structured the liability buffer through marital asset agreements. If regulators trace the chain, you appear complicit. Her breathing steadied rather than quickened. So if this explodes, I'm the fall person. Daniel did not soften it. Yes. The humiliation of the driveway now reframed itself. This had never been emotional recklessness. It was legal insulation. And Serena? Charlotte asked. She has no idea, Daniel replied. She thinks this is about marriage and status. She's a distraction. Charlotte absorbed that quietly. Why tell me now? Because I refuse to certify the final audit before the merger, Daniel said. Victor forced my resignation. He believes I destroyed my internal copies. And you didn't. Daniel slid a small encrypted drive across the table. Transaction trails. Zoning approvals. Internal memos. Enough to trigger federal scrutiny if presented correctly. Charlotte stared at it but did not touch it immediately. If this goes public before the merger, the deal collapses. So does Victor's leverage. And if it's mishandled, he buries it. And you. The bluntness was almost comforting. Charlotte finally picked up the drive, feeling its weight in her palm. He threw me out to minimize exposure before regulators look closer. Yes, Daniel said. He assumed you would disappear quietly. A bitter calm settled inside her. He underestimated me. Daniel glanced toward the cafe window subtly. He underestimates anyone he thinks he controls. Charlotte followed his gaze. Across the street, parked under a flickering lamp, was a black SUV she recognized from the estate security fleet. Its engine was running. They're watching, Daniel murmured. Charlotte slid the drive into her coat pocket slowly, her expression unreadable now. Fear had transformed into something sharper. He removed the wrong liability, she said quietly. As she stood to leave, the SUV's headlights brightened slightly. They weren't just observing. They were reporting back. Charlotte Whitman signed the lease with a steady hand, even though the name on the paper no longer matched the one the world associated with scandal. The one-bedroom apartment was small, neutral, forgettable, exactly what she needed. No doorman. No marble floors. No staff whispering updates to Victor. Just beige walls, thin curtains, and a view of another building's brick exterior. It was anonymity, and for now, anonymity meant safety. But safety was relative. By her second night there, she noticed the pattern. The same black SUV parked across the street just after dusk. The same silhouette in the driver's seat. It never approached. It didn't need to. Surveillance wasn't about intimidation. It was about pressure. Victor was watching. A sharp contraction seized her lower abdomen as she stood in the kitchen pouring water. She braced herself against the counter, breathing slowly the way her doctor had taught her months ago during prenatal class, back when she thought she'd be delivering her child into a stable home. At the urgent care clinic the following morning, the doctor's tone was firm. Stress like this can trigger preterm labor. You need reduced cortisol levels, rest, and consistency. Charlotte almost laughed at the word consistency. Instead, she nodded and promised compliance she wasn't sure she could afford. Across Manhattan, Victor Langston sat in a soundproof conference room reviewing updates from the private investigative firm he had retained. Photographs of Charlotte entering the building. Leaving the building. Meeting Daniel Mercer. Speaking with a woman identified as Rebecca Monroe. Monroe? Victor repeated, eyes narrowing. Federal Securities Attorney, the investigator replied. High-profile cases. Victor's fingers tapped once against the polished table. Keep your distance. I want observation, not provocation. Serena Caldwell watched the exchange from the far end of the room, impatience tightening her jaw. Why are you acting like she's dangerous? She demanded after the call ended. You threw her out. She has nothing. Victor finally looked at her. She has motive. She's pregnant, Serena snapped. She's not launching a war. Victor didn't answer immediately, but a flicker of doubt passed behind his composure. Charlotte had not pleaded that night. She had not screamed. That silence unsettled him more than hysteria would have. Back in the apartment, Charlotte plugged Daniel's encrypted drive into a secured laptop Rebecca Monroe had provided. They sat across from each other in Rebecca's office later that afternoon, documents projected on a private screen. Rebecca's voice was precise, controlled. The valuation inflation is deliberate. Zoning approvals rerouted through shell entities tied directly to Victor's biometric authorization. This isn't sloppy accounting. It's engineered. And my digital signature? Charlotte asked quietly. Embedded in spousal authorization matrices, Rebecca replied. If regulators dig post-merger, you appear as complicit co-authorizer. Charlotte absorbed it without visible reaction. So the timing of my removal wasn't emotional. It was strategic liability management, Rebecca said. The baby shifted faintly beneath Charlotte's palm. The physical reminder sharpened her clarity. What's our window? She asked. 7 days before the acquisition closes, Rebecca replied. If we file an emergency injunction with federal regulators before that, we can pause the merger pending review. And if we don't? Once the merger finalizes, unwinding it becomes exponentially harder. Charlotte looked toward the window, watching traffic move below like an indifferent river. He thinks I'll retreat. Rebecca studied her carefully. Will you? Charlotte's eyes hardened. My child will not inherit corruption. The statement carried no drama, only conviction. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then we move immediately. I'll prepare a sealed submission. But understand, once this triggers, Victor escalates. He already escalated, Charlotte said quietly. That evening, she returned to the apartment and noticed the SUV again. Same vehicle. Same patient posture. She walked past it without slowing down, refusing to acknowledge the power play. Her phone buzzed as she unlocked the door. Notification: Victor Langston to appear on national business broadcast discussing stability amid personal challenges. She almost admired the audacity. Minutes later, Rebecca called. There's movement, Rebecca said. From regulators? Charlotte asked. No. From family court. Charlotte leaned against the kitchen counter, already sensing the angle. He filed an emergency petition, Rebecca continued. He's requesting a psychiatric evaluation and immediate protective custody review for the unborn child. Silence filled the apartment. On paper, it would read like concern. A father protecting his future son from an unstable mother under stress. In reality, it was leverage. If Charlotte was legally categorized as mentally unfit, her credibility in any federal filing weakened instantly. He's trying to discredit me before we submit, Charlotte said. Yes. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly, studying her breathing. Victor wasn't just monitoring her. He was preparing to take her child. The headlines began shifting within 48 hours of Victor's custody petition. What had started as whispers about a high-profile separation evolved into carefully planted narratives. Sources close to Langston family expressed concern over wife's emotional state. Billionaire seeks stability for unborn child amid marital turmoil. The phrasing was subtle, surgical. Not accusations, concern. Not hostility, protection. Victor understood media optics better than most politicians. He didn't attack Charlotte directly. He let unnamed insiders do it for him. Inside his penthouse office, he reviewed sentiment analysis metrics while his communications director briefed him. Public sympathy is tilting in your favor, she said. The custody petition reinforces responsibility. Victor nodded slowly. Maintain the tone. No aggression. Just concern. Across town, Serena Caldwell took a different approach. She appeared on a lifestyle podcast that thrived on scandal masked as empowerment. Her voice carried gentle sympathy, but her eyes betrayed calculation. Charlotte has always been sensitive, Serena said carefully. Victor tried to protect her from stress, but sometimes people create storms around themselves. The clip went viral within hours. Social media ignited. Comment threads filled with amateur diagnoses and moral judgments. Charlotte's photo circulated alongside words like unstable, volatile, unfit. Strangers debated her mental health as if it were entertainment. Charlotte watched the spiral from the small couch in her apartment, phone resting in her palm. She did not cry. She did not shout. The humiliation was familiar now, but the difference was awareness. Victor needed her emotionally reactive. Instead, she opened her laptop and began recording. My name is Charlotte Hayes, she said into the camera, her voice calm, steady. I am 7 months pregnant. I have not endangered my child. I have not lost control. I have asked questions about financial transactions that deserve answers. She paused deliberately. There is a difference between instability and inconvenience. She stopped recording and saved the file without uploading it. Timing mattered. A premature response would look defensive. She would speak when it disrupted something meaningful. Meanwhile, Rebecca Monroe moved swiftly behind the scenes. She filed a motion challenging the psychiatric petition on procedural grounds, citing retaliatory intent and reputational harm. Simultaneously, she finalized the sealed federal submission package that could delay the acquisition merger. We have 9 days, Rebecca said during a late evening call. After that, leverage narrows. 9 days until Victor's empire became structurally insulated. Back in the penthouse, Serena paced restlessly. You need to end this, she snapped. Every day this drags out, more investors get nervous. Victor stood near the window overlooking the skyline. They're nervous because of regulatory noise, not her. You're still afraid of her, Serena accused. Victor turned slowly. I don't fear Charlotte. I account for risk. Serena folded her arms tightly. Then why hasn't she broken yet? Victor didn't answer. The question lingered. The next morning, Serena doubled down. During a televised charity appearance, she delivered the line that would echo across every platform. Some women break under pressure, she said with a polished smile. And some men have to protect their children from that. Charlotte watched the clip in silence. The insult was intentional, bait disguised as concern. Rebecca's voice came through the phone moments later. They're escalating publicly. We expected this. Let them, Charlotte replied evenly. You're not going to release your video? Not yet. Outside the apartment building, the black SUV remained. Surveillance had become routine. The message was clear, you are being observed. Charlotte shifted her focus back to strategy. She reviewed financial news, investor confidence graphs, and public merger timelines. Revenge was emotional. Justice required precision. Her phone rang unexpectedly. Daniel Mercer. She answered immediately. His breathing was uneven. They were here, he said. Who? Charlotte asked, though she already knew. My apartment was broken into. No forced entry. They went straight to my office. My backup drives are gone. Charlotte's grip tightened on the phone. Did you report it? Yes. Police filed a routine burglary report, but nothing obvious was taken. Only the backups. The silence between them felt heavy. "Victor thinks you kept copies," Charlotte said quietly. "He was right," Daniel replied. "And now they're gone." Charlotte glanced toward her coat pocket where the encrypted drive still rested. "They didn't get everything," she said carefully. Daniel exhaled shakily. "You need to move fast." Before she could respond, another notification flashed across her phone screen. Breaking news: Langston Holdings acquisition expected to proceed despite personal distractions. Victor was signaling confidence. Charlotte stood slowly, walking toward the window. The SUV's headlights flickered briefly as if acknowledging movement inside. Victor believed he was still ahead. But he didn't know how much time he had left. At 8:12 a.m., Rebecca Monroe submitted the sealed emergency injunction to federal regulators. There was no press release, no public accusation, no dramatic announcement. Just documentation, time-stamped, encrypted, precise. Transaction trails. Zoning manipulation records. Shell company registrations. Biometric authorization logs tied directly to Victor Langston. By 10:47 a.m., Langston Holdings received formal notice: acquisition temporarily suspended pending regulatory review. On the trading floor, the tremor began quietly. Analysts flagged unexpected compliance inquiry. Financial anchors shifted tone from admiration to curiosity. Within an hour, the company's stock dipped 3%. Then 5%. In his penthouse office, Victor read the notice twice before setting the tablet down slowly. "She wouldn't dare," he muttered. But she had. His legal team scrambled, phones ringing non-stop. "It's a preliminary pause," one attorney insisted. "We can characterize this as routine." Victor's composure cracked just slightly. "Find the breach. Now." Across the city, Serena stared at her phone in disbelief as investor chat forums erupted. "Regulatory freeze?" she whispered. "What did she do?" Victor ignored her question, but the answer hovered in the room like smoke. Charlotte sat across from Rebecca, hands folded calmly over her stomach. She had expected fear when the submission went live. Instead, she felt clarity. "It worked," Rebecca said quietly. "They've initiated a preliminary audit. That alone delays the merger." "How long?" Charlotte asked. "Long enough to hurt." Within hours, media headlines pivoted. Langston acquisition delayed amid regulatory scrutiny. Commentators speculated about internal whistleblowers. Charlotte's name began surfacing again, but not in the way Victor had engineered. By late afternoon, Victor requested a private meeting. Rebecca advised against it. "He's unpredictable when cornered." "That's exactly why I need to see him," Charlotte replied. They met in a neutral law office conference room overlooking Midtown. Victor arrived first, suit immaculate, posture controlled but eyes sharper than usual. When Charlotte entered, visibly pregnant yet composed, the balance in the room shifted. "You've made a mistake," Victor said immediately. "No," she replied calmly. "I corrected one." His jaw tightened. "You think federal oversight makes you safe?" "I think documentation makes me credible." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Name your price." The words hung between them. "Withdraw the submission. Sign the custody agreement. I'll reinstate your financial access, grant equity shares, establish a trust fund. You walk away wealthy and protected." Charlotte held his gaze steadily. "Integrity isn't negotiable." Frustration flickered across his face. "You're emotional." "No," she corrected softly. "I'm informed." Victor's voice hardened. "If this acquisition collapses, thousands of jobs are affected. Investors lose millions. You destroy more than me. You structured that risk, she replied. Not me. For the first time, Victor looked uncertain, not because he lacked options, but because his usual psychological leverage was failing. You were supposed to disappear quietly, he said. You miscalculated, Charlotte answered. Outside the conference room, Serena waited anxiously. She had spent the afternoon fielding cancelled invitations and cautious texts from social circles that once competed for her presence. Public association with Victor was beginning to feel volatile. When Victor exited the meeting without speaking to her, she followed him into the elevator. What did she say? She refused, he replied curtly. Serena's composure fractured. You said she had nothing. Victor stared ahead. She has evidence. Back in Rebecca's office, Charlotte watched financial news unfold in real time. The narrative shift accelerated. Analysts debated internal corruption rather than marital instability. Her recorded video, still unreleased, remained stored on her laptop. Wait, Rebecca advised. Let the story evolve organically. By evening, the stock had dropped 8%. Investor calls flooded Langston Holdings. Board members demanded explanations. Victor returned to his office to find 3 missed calls from major stakeholders. For the first time, he felt pressure not from Charlotte, but from the structure he had built. At 7:03 p.m., Rebecca's phone rang. She listened silently, nodding once before ending the call. Charlotte looked up. What now? Rebecca's expression shifted from strategic to serious. The regulatory pause triggered something larger. Federal investigators are opening a formal inquiry. Charlotte's breathing remained steady. They want sworn testimony, Rebecca continued. From you. Silence filled the room. This was no longer a delay tactic. It was escalation. Victor believed he had cornered her. Instead, she had frozen his empire. And now, the government wanted her voice under oath. The subpoenas arrived without warning and without ceremony. Federal envelopes stamped with authority were delivered to Langston Holdings before markets even opened. Senior executives were summoned for document production. Financial records were frozen pending review. Internal emails were requested in full, not excerpts. The quiet pause Charlotte had triggered was now a structural tremor. Victor Langston stood in his glass office overlooking Manhattan, watching employees move below like pieces on a board he no longer fully controlled. His general counsel spoke rapidly over speakerphone. They're requesting biometric authorization logs, offshore transfer documentation, and zoning approval chains tied directly to your executive clearance. Victor's jaw tightened. We comply procedurally. And if they escalate? They won't, he said, though the certainty felt thinner than before. By midday, 2 board members resigned citing personal reasons. Financial networks dissected the departures within minutes. Analysts began questioning governance oversight. The stock dipped again. Across town, Charlotte watched the coverage from her apartment, a hand resting protectively over her stomach. The baby had been unusually restless all morning, reacting to the tension that seemed to follow her everywhere. Rebecca Monroe called with updates every few hours, each one more serious than the last. They've traced several offshore accounts directly to Victor's executive key, Rebecca explained. Not delegated. Not indirect. Direct. Charlotte absorbed that quietly. He can't deflect that. No, Rebecca said. But he'll try. Serena Caldwell was already trying to reposition herself. A carefully worded statement appeared on her social media accounts. I have never been involved in Langston Holdings' financial operations and support full transparency. The tone was cautious, distancing. Within elite circles, invitations stopped coming. Association had become liability. That evening, Serena confronted Victor in the penthouse. You told me everything was clean, she demanded, her voice no longer controlled. It is clean, Victor snapped. Then why are they issuing subpoenas? Victor's silence answered more than words could. For the first time, a calculation formed in his mind that did not involve Charlotte. Serena had proximity, public presence, emotional volatility. If necessary, she could be repositioned as reckless influence rather than partner. The thought did not disturb him. Meanwhile, Charlotte's body began showing the cost of prolonged stress. Severe abdominal tightening sent her to the hospital for monitoring. Doctors stabilized her condition and ordered strict rest. You're carrying too much, the physician warned gently. Charlotte managed a faint smile. That's not new. From the hospital bed, she took a call from Victor. You're enjoying this spectacle? He asked coldly. I'm ensuring accountability, she replied evenly. You think regulators will protect you? He pressed. Custody litigation can stretch for years. Evaluations. Depositions. Psychological assessments. You won't withstand it. She felt anger rise but did not let it show. Threatening a pregnant woman won't save your merger. This isn't about the merger anymore, he said. It's about damage control. For who? She asked softly. The line went silent before disconnecting. Rebecca moved quickly after that call. She filed protective motions challenging the custody petition's intent and requested federal oversight consideration of retaliatory litigation. Legal shields layered around Charlotte like armor. Daniel Mercer, increasingly anxious after the apartment break-in, agreed to cooperate fully with federal authorities. He was placed under protective supervision pending testimony. For the first time, he felt less hunted and more heard. At Langston Holdings, forensic accountants dug deeper. Authorization timestamps matched Victor's personal biometric logins. Transfer sequences aligned with merger timeline pressure points. The architecture of the scheme was no longer abstract, it was mapped. Victor's composure began to fracture in private moments. He paced his office late into the night, replaying scenarios. Settlement. Deflection. Controlled confession. None restored control fully. The following afternoon, Rebecca called Charlotte with a tone she rarely used, measured but grave. They've uncovered something new, she said. What? Charlotte asked. There's an encrypted executive file stored separately from the main financial network. It's flagged under restricted access. Charlotte's pulse steadied. Content? Unknown, Rebecca replied. But it can only be accessed using Victor's biometric authorization. Silence settled. If that file contained contingency plans, internal admissions, or communications beyond the shell structure, it could collapse what remained of his defense. If it contained something worse, the fallout could expand beyond financial crime. Charlotte looked out the hospital window at the city skyline, calm despite the storm moving beneath it. Victor still believed he could outmaneuver exposure. He didn't yet realize the final piece of his own system might be the one that destroyed him. The courtroom felt colder than it should have the morning the biometric order was enforced. Victor Langston had resisted voluntary access to the encrypted executive file, citing proprietary protections and executive confidentiality. The judge disagreed. When federal fraud investigations intersect with sealed corporate data, privilege narrows quickly. Victor stood beside his legal counsel as a federal technician positioned the secured device in front of him. The room was quiet except for the low hum of electronics. Place your thumb on the scanner, Mr. Langston, the investigator instructed evenly. Victor hesitated for half a second too long. Non-compliance will be noted. His jaw tightened as he pressed his thumb down. The system unlocked. Within minutes, the encrypted file decrypted across a protected federal terminal. There were spreadsheets, coded notes, internal projections, but one file drew immediate attention. An audio recording labeled Contingency, Internal Narrative. The playback began. Victor's voice filled the courtroom speakers, calm, strategic, unmistakable. Evaluation scrutiny intensifies pre-merger, shift focus internally. Spousal authorization structure provides liability insulation. Public framing should emphasize emotional instability. Custody petition accelerates leverage. Silence followed the final word. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not speculation. It was a blueprint. Charlotte listened from the back row, Rebecca seated beside her. She did not react outwardly. But something inside her settled permanently. The doubt he had tried to plant, the gaslighting, the accusations of instability, they dissolved under the weight of his own recorded intent. Within hours, the recording leaked to national media. Langston executive audio suggests deliberate framing scheme. Merger officially terminated amid criminal inquiry. The acquisition was permanently cancelled before markets closed. Investors withdrew. Partner corporations issued distancing statements. Analysts shifted language from uncertainty to collapse. In the penthouse, Serena Caldwell watched the broadcast replay in disbelief. Her name trended alongside Victor's, not as co-conspirator, but a symbol of excess and poor judgment. Sponsors withdrew invitations. Luxury brands quietly removed her from campaigns. "You said it was contained," she whispered when Victor returned home briefly under counsel supervision. Victor didn't respond. "You are going to frame her?" Serena demanded. "It was precautionary," he snapped. "For what? Your ego?" He turned on her sharply. "You benefited from that ego." But even as he spoke, something hollow echoed beneath the anger. The following morning, federal agents executed an arrest warrant. Victor adjusted his suit before leaving the penthouse, maintaining the posture of a man who still believed perception mattered. Cameras gathered outside as agents escorted him down the building's private elevator. "Mr. Langston, do you deny the authenticity of the audio recording? Were you planning to falsely accuse your wife? Is this the end of Langston Holdings?" He did not answer. Across town, Charlotte received confirmation that the emergency custody petition had been dismissed outright. The judge cited retaliatory intent and evidentiary misconduct. The narrative Victor had tried to engineer collapsed fully under judicial scrutiny. Asset seizure proceedings began within days. Bank accounts frozen. Real estate holdings audited. Executive compensation clawback initiated. The empire that once symbolized untouchable power now resembled a cautionary case study. In federal custody, Victor finally had silence. No advisors. No analysts. No public relations buffer. Just concrete walls and consequence. He requested access to televised coverage of the investigation. When the clip replayed, the audio memo, his own voice detailing the plan to frame Charlotte, his composure finally fractured. It wasn't fear that surfaced first. It was realization. He had not been outsmarted by Charlotte alone. He had been undone by his own certainty. Charlotte visited Rebecca's office that afternoon, calmer than she had been in weeks. "It's over," Rebecca said quietly. "No," Charlotte replied. "It's accountable." There was a difference. Days later, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When she held him for the first time, the chaos of investigations and headlines felt distant, almost irrelevant. What mattered was the steady rhythm of his breathing against her chest. Victor learned of the birth through legal correspondence. In custody, he sat alone after reading the notice. The magnitude of what he had sacrificed settled in slowly. Not just the merger. Not just the company. His name. His legacy. His family. For the first time, regret was not strategic. It was personal. Late that evening, Rebecca received a formal request through federal channels. She called Charlotte immediately. "He's asking for a meeting," Rebecca said carefully. Charlotte adjusted the blanket around her newborn, her expression unreadable. "On what grounds?" she asked. Rebecca paused briefly before answering. "He says he needs to speak to you before sentencing." 3 months later, the skyline looked the same, but everything beneath it had shifted. Charlotte Hayes stood near the window of her new townhouse, cradling her newborn son against her shoulder. Ethan Hayes Langston slept peacefully, unaware that his last name had once dominated financial headlines for all the wrong reasons. The delivery had been difficult but steady, and when she first heard him cry, something inside her finally released. Not anger. Not revenge. Closure. Public perception had completed its reversal. The same media outlets that once questioned her stability now featured her in measured interviews about corporate accountability. She did not overexpose herself. She chose her appearances carefully, her tone composed, never triumphant. "This was never about revenge," she said in one televised segment. "It was about responsibility." Behind the scenes, she had already begun building something new. The Hayes Initiative for Ethical Housing Reform launched quietly but decisively, aimed at transparency in urban development and zoning compliance. Former regulators joined her advisory board. Advocacy groups reached out. What Victor had built on manipulation, she was rebuilding on disclosure. Serena Caldwell, meanwhile, discovered how fragile social status truly is. Invitations stopped arriving. Sponsorship contracts dissolved without explanation. Charity galas no longer returned her calls. In one particularly humiliating moment, she arrived at a private fundraiser only to find her name removed from the guest list. Her association with Victor had once elevated her. Now it marked her. The sentencing hearing drew national coverage. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Victor Langston entered in a dark suit, thinner than before, posture still disciplined but eyes carrying something new, weariness. Inside a secured conference room before proceedings began, Charlotte agreed to meet him privately. Rebecca Monroe remained nearby but allowed them space. Victor looked at her differently now. Not as a liability. Not as an opponent. As consequence. "You look, well," he said quietly, glancing toward Ethan in her arms. "He is," Charlotte replied. Silence stretched between them. "I was wrong," Victor said finally. She did not react. "I thought control was strength," he continued. "I thought risk management justified everything. I didn't realize I was dismantling my own life." Charlotte's voice remained calm. "You didn't dismantle it. You traded it." "For what?" he asked, the question sounding less defensive and more genuine. "For ego," she answered softly. Victor's composure faltered. "I never intended for it to go this far." "You recorded a plan to frame me," she reminded him. "You filed to take my child." He lowered his gaze. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Of me?" "Of exposure." The honesty came too late to alter anything. Outside the room, Serena stood near a television monitor broadcasting live coverage of the hearing. When the camera briefly captured Victor's face, strained, apologetic, something inside her shifted. The man who once projected invincibility now looked diminished. Not by prison walls yet, but by realization. During sentencing, the judge cited deliberate fraud, abuse of legal systems, and calculated harm. Asset seizure orders were confirmed. A custodial sentence was imposed. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Victor closed his eyes briefly as the decision settled. Serena's composure cracked entirely outside the courthouse when reporters pressed her for comment. "I didn't know," she insisted, her voice breaking. "I didn't know any of this." But ignorance did not restore reputation. After the hearing, Charlotte entered the visitation room one final time. Victor sat on the opposite side of the table, hands folded, restraints visible but no longer symbolic. They were literal now. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "For all of it." She reached into her coat pocket and removed her wedding ring, the same one she had carried since the night he threw her into the storm. Without ceremony, without anger, she placed it on the metal table between them. "This isn't punishment," she said. "It's release." Victor stared at the ring but did not touch it. Charlotte adjusted Ethan gently in her arms. "My son will inherit truth," she said evenly. "Not fear." She stood and walked out without looking back. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter than it had in months. Cameras flashed, but she moved through them without pause. Rebecca joined her at the car. Before they could leave, a federal prosecutor approached, extending a card. "There's another corporation under investigation," he said. "They're requesting your testimony regarding executive liability reform." Charlotte glanced down at the card, then back at the courthouse doors behind her. Victor Langston's chapter was closing. But hers was expanding. As she secured Ethan into his car seat and closed the door gently, she understood something clearly. She had not just survived betrayal. She had recalculated her future. Some stories aren't just about scandal, they're about consequences. If you believe power should never silence truth, stay connected to this channel, because stories like this deserve an audience that understands them. And if accountability still matters to you, make sure you don't miss what comes next. Now let me ask you something honestly. If you were in Charlotte's place, betrayed, erased, and publicly humiliated, would you have chosen revenge, or would you have chosen exposure and let the truth do the damage? What would you have done?